Hi, I'm Gwen Evans. I'm a practicing artist. I've graduated from a fine art degree at the Manchester School of Art, and I currently have an art studio at Paradise Works in Manchester. So today I'm really excited to be showing you this workshop where we're going to be using instant coffee and turmeric to paint a landscape in nature in the style of the Japanese artist Hokusai. For our subject today, I've chosen the Fairy Glen in Wigan because I really like it and I've got a lot of fond memories there. I've got a really good connection with the area and it makes me feel happy thinking about the Fairy Glen. But you guys can choose whichever landscape you have a connection with, or you can follow the same subject as me if you like. What I like most about the Fairy Glen is not only the place itself, but the walk there along the Wigan Canal. The water's really calming, I really like it. And then when you get to the Fairy Glen, they've got all these running streams and waterfalls, and I just find the sound really relaxing. I think it's a bit of a hidden gem really, it's overlooked and it's a really beautiful spot that some people don't know about. So that's what I like about it as well, it's a hidden gem. I find that painting really reduces my level of anxiety, which I do struggle with from time to time. It's the act of distracting yourself really with the painting and taking you away from any negative thoughts or feelings you might be having. So hopefully painting can help you if you're feeling down or anxious. Throughout this workshop today, I'm going to be looking at my computer because I'm referencing an image of the Fairy Glen in Wigan and also a painting by Hokusai called A Tour of the Waterfalls in the Provinces. We're going to be taking our inspiration today from the Japanese artist Hokusai. Hokusai was born around 1760, they're not quite sure about the specific date, and he paid specific attention to his natural surroundings. And he painted or printed mountains, landscapes, wildlife, the sea, rivers. He had a really deep connection with nature. Hokusai was actually a practicing Buddhist, and Buddhism teaches mindfulness and meditation as an antidote to anxiety, depression, and even feelings of tiredness. When I look at Hokusai's work, I get a real sense of calm, and I think I can see in it that he practiced meditation. He paid really close attention to nature, and I think that's what's so relaxing when you look at his work. Often he paints vast landscapes and scenes in nature, and I think that connecting with nature, looking at nature and painting it is really beneficial for our well-being. Right, let's get started with our painting. Today you're going to need some instant coffee, some turmeric powder. You're going to need some containers to mix your instant coffee and turmeric in. Paintbrushes, maybe a makeup brush if you don't have any brushes in the house, a pencil, a pen, a rubber. You're also going to need some tissues in case you have any spillage, and if you can, find the thickest paper you have in the house because the paper might wrinkle and warp a little bit with the water that we're putting on it. This is an example of a practice painting I made earlier, and you can see the different shades and effects you can get with the coffee and also with the turmeric as well. But if you don't have turmeric, you can use tea bags, or you can try and use any household objects really, anything you can find in the house. To begin our painting, I'm going to sketch out the outline of our picture or your picture that you have, really lightly in pencil. We don't want to make it too dark because we don't want the pencil to come through after we've painted it. So I'm just looking at my reference image and at Hokusai's painting that I've got on my computer. and doing the outline of the tops of these cliffs really lightly. I've already half sketched it out, but I'm just going to go over this lightly again. So we really want to simplify our picture. We don't need to worry too much about making it look photorealistic or exactly like the picture, because when we look at Hokusai's work, he's really simplified the shapes in his picture. I just want to get the simple outline. You don't have to worry too much about details to begin with. And all the while I'm looking at Hokusai's work and I'm trying to replicate his style, how he simplified all the natural forms in his work. So now I'm going to be drawing this water in, and when I look at Hokusai's painting, he's not realistically drawn the water. He's added movement to the water with these different forks in the stream, and they're all going in different directions. Now that I've finished my outline, I've done it really lightly, but I'm still going to go with my rubber because I don't want it to go through the painting. So I'm just going to lightly just skim over the top. You don't want to rub everything out. This is what I like to do. You don't have to do it, but I don't want the pencil marks coming through too much after it's painted. So you've still got a clear outline, but it's not really strong. So get all the rubber off, well, that's going to mess up your painting. We don't want that in the paint. Now that we've got the outline of the painting done, we're going to start mixing our paints out of coffee and turmeric. We want to create 3 different shades. We want 1 light shade, 1 medium and 1 dark. And this is going to be a rule that we are going to follow when we're painting our painting. And I'm going to be using a spoon as a measurement to mix my paint. So for the first shade, which will be the lighter shade, we're going to use 1 teaspoon of coffee. For our second shade, the medium shade, we're going to be using 2 teaspoons of coffee. And for the last shade, which is the darkest, we're going to put 3 teaspoons of coffee in that. And this is going to give different values to the work. So values basically means the different shades. I'm just going to put a little bit of water in each one, just the same amount of water. I'm going to mix these. We've mixed our shades, but you need to remember that the very lightest part of the image, which is basically your white colour, we won't be painting that at all. So leave everything in your image that's white, leave that blank. Now I'm going to be mixing my turmeric colour, which is going to give us a nice yellow. And for this I only want to do about half a teaspoon. And if you don't have any turmeric, you can just look in your spice cupboard and see what you can find. You could try cumin, paprika maybe, Or if you've got some fruit teas hanging around, you can always paint with them. So before I begin, I just want to do some swatches to see that I've got the right shades. And just to check what it looks like on paper. And then if you find that your shades aren't quite right, you can always add more coffee or add more water. So now I'm going to swatch my lightest shade, the lightest value, coffee. Now that I've actually put the shades on paper, I don't think there's enough contrast between the light shade, the middle shade and the dark shade, which is fine. We've done a practice to see if they're the right shade. So to make them darker, and to my middle shade, I'm going to put an extra teaspoon of coffee, just to make it a bit darker. Now I'm going to test those shades again to see if they're a bit better. So I'm taking my medium shade, and I can already see that's a lot darker, and I'm a lot happier with that shade now. Now I'm going to test my dark shade again. And I feel quite happy with those. I'm going to take a clean brush, and I'm now going to test the yellow shade we've got, which is turmeric. And you can see that the turmeric, it's a bit granulated because it doesn't quite melt. But I quite like the rough texture it gives. After it's dried, you can always brush the turmeric off and it gets rid of that texture if you don't like it. Now we're going to start painting our painting. So I'm going to take one of my biggest brushes. If you only have one brush, then don't worry, just use whatever brush you have to hand. And I want to paint the sky first. So I want my sky to be a bit yellow. So I'm taking the turmeric and I'm going to try and do this gradient. So I want the top of the sky to have more colour in it than the bottom. And you can see in a lot of Hokusai's work, he's got like this gradient effect in the sky where one part is darker than the other. So that's what I want to try and do. So I've done this stroke here with a lot of turmeric on my brush. Now I'm going to clean it off, just so there's some water on my brush. And now I'm going to fade that out because we want to create a gradient effect. So you might have to go in and out with a bit of turmeric, a bit of water, and do this by eye. I'm covering all of the sky with our yellow turmeric. Try and get it so it's even, because where the turmeric is collected, it's going to be a bit of a darker colour there. So we want to try and get it evenly spread out. Now that I'm looking at it, I think that I want the bottom to be a bit lighter. So get a tissue and you can just dab the bottom of the skyline and it just lifts that colour up. And then I'm going to go back in with my brush and fade that in. Now I'm going to make sure that I wash my brush well and get off that excess water. Now that I've painted the sky, I want to paint the lightest part of the picture with my lightest shade. And we're going to do it step by step. So we're going to paint the lightest part of the picture first, then the middle shade, and then the darkest shade. And when I look at my picture, I think that the lightest shade is the tops of these hills here, these kind of mounds that we've got near the water. So again, I'm going to take my big brush, I'm going to get my lighter shade, and I'm going to start painting the tops of these hills that we've got. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to paint from light to dark, and this is a good rule to use in any form of painting. If you're doing watercolour, or even if you're doing oils, it's always good to paint from light to dark. Because once you've painted over an area, it's really hard to lift the colour from that area. So that's why you should always paint light to dark. Now what's quite fun to do to create some texture and effect is to scrunch your tissue up, and you can just dab the painting and it lifts the colour and creates this kind of textured effect. But it has to be a dry tissue. So that's just quite a nice trick. You don't have to do that if you don't want to, but that's what I like to do. So I'm still painting all the lightest parts of the image. I've still got my light shade. And again, so it matches the other side, I'm taking my dry tissue and I'm just going to crumple it on top to create this nice textured effect. And this is going to give the impression of grass or leaves or foliage. I want to add a little bit of colour to the water, so I'm going to take my lighter shade again, only a little bit on my brush, and I'm just going to add in some shading to the darker bits of the water. So we don't want too much. You can always dab it off and add a bit of water if it's a bit too dark. Now that I've finished putting my light shade in, next I'm going to go in with my middle shade. So when I look at my picture, I think the middle shade is the trees and the little bits of grass and kind of shrubs that I drew in before. So I'm going to start painting that in. Actually, I think I'm going to use slightly smaller brush for this because it's a bit more detailed. And I'm going to go in and paint my tree. So now I'm starting to paint the little bits of leaves and bushes that I drew in before. Still using my middle shade. And I'm always referencing Hokusai's painting in my photograph. Still using my middle shade, I'm going to go in and paint some detail into this water and some shading. When I look at Hokusai, he's put some deep shades in the water to kind of create these squiggly lines. So that's what I'm going to do. Now I'm going to go in with my darker shade. When I look at my picture, the darker shade is the shadows underneath or kind of these hills and mounds. So that's the bit that I'm going to paint next. And I'm going to get a medium-sized brush and now I'll start filling in this bit. And I might need to swap between these two brushes, the small one and the medium one, just to get these sharp edges in. I can also see a dark shade in the shadow of the running water, so I'm going to fill that in as well, just to create some depth. Now that I've got all the main colours in, all the main shades, I'm going to go in with a small brush and I'm going to mix a slightly darker coffee colour, and I'm going to go over the outline of my image, so over the pencil lines that we drew before, just because I want to really bring the painting out. And when I look at Hokusai's work, he's got these really sharp outlines around the different forms. So you can add coffee to one of your existing shades. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get one of my smaller brushes and get some of the turmeric, and I'm just going to add some highlights to the water because I think that would be a nice reflection between the sky and having a bit of the sky's light in the water. I'm just going to add some small little details in, like the blades of the grass, because I think this is going to add a bit more detail to the work. I'm just using my lightest colour because I don't want it to be too stark. I'm just adding little bits of details now, like adding some darker points to the bushes that I put in earlier. Just dabbing that on lightly. I think I'm finished. So here is the finished painting. I hope you guys enjoyed that workshop. I know that I did. And really it was just meant to be something fun where you can experiment with household materials, and I hope you stay creative. Thanks for joining me today. Bye.